Okay, so get started. All right. There you go. All right, Baruch Hashem. We are here to learn Parshat Behar. It's a very short parsha, and because of that, we'll have the merit to learn almost each of the first few psukim in some detail as we do our deep dive. But before that, let's get to what the parsha is about. Usually, first of all, by the way, I should mention, happy Lag BaOmer to everybody. These are the last moments of Lag BaOmer right now. And I'm sorry?
Well, it's done for me, but I think
well, it's never done. But yes, Baruch Hashem, it's still the waning hours of Lag BaOmer. A lot of people do all kinds of things for Lag BaOmer, bonfires, haircuts. The main thing to do for Lag BaOmer is to learn. So that's what we're doing. Baruch Hashem. Learn Torah. That it's a day of Torah. It's the day that the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying, or it's the day, according to legend, the yard site of Shimon Bar Yochai, also connection to Torah, or it's the day that the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the Zohar. Whatever the case may be, it's a day of Torah. So Baruch Hashem, we have the merit to learn Torah together on Lag BaOmer, the last few moments of Lag BaOmer. Anyway, the parsha Behar is usually read together with Bechukotai. This year it is not, and the reason is because it's a leap year, an Uber year, a year for Uber. So Uber means pregnant or having and so it's a pregnant year. It's a leap year. Huh?
So funny. I'm surprised nobody did like an Uber type joke beforehand.
Yeah. So I'm first. All right. Copyright that.
Yeah, no, right. Exactly. Copyright.
All right. So usually they're read together, which is, and the reason why we split it up, or why they're read when they're read, has a lot to do with the next parsha, actually, because the next parsha, Bechukotai, has in it some of the warnings to the Jewish people about what will happen if they're not following the mitzvot, and those warnings, along with the warnings also in the end of Devarim. So those warnings have to be read before Shavuot and before Rosh Hashanah. That's according to the Gemara. So everything's kind of timed in such a way that this parsha, the Bechukotai, is read at the Shabbat before Shavuot. We don't want it right before Shavuot, as in this year, the Shabbat before Shavuot is a day before Shavuot. So you don't want to go into Shavuot depressed with the warnings and the scary stuff that's written there. So as we'll talk about probably next week anyway, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. But this year, we're learning Behar separately, and there's quite a bit to say about it. So let's focus in on this parsha now that we can. Just a general sort of parsha in a nutshell, and then we'll get into the deeper dive. The most of the beginning of the parsha deals with the mitzvot of Shemitah. Very, very relevant to us. This year is when Shemitta is a Shemitah year in Israel, and happens to be also in Mishnah Yomi that we started learning earlier this year. We're in the Mishnah, the Mishnah to deal with Shvit, which is the Mishnah of Shemitta. So Shemitta is the land is supposed to be fallow, supposed to be not worked for every 7 years, right? 1 year every 7 years. You're not supposed to work the land. You're not supposed to water the land. You're not supposed to benefit the fruit of that year at all. And you're not allowed to even sell the fruit that you're growing. So in the agrarian society that the Jewish people had then, there was a big deal. I think they couldn't sell anything. So how did they eat? So you were allowed to go to anybody's field and take whatever fruit you wanted. It was free. and everybody knew that. There was a time, 1 year every 7 years, the whole year you shared, just like in preschool. You learned to share. So, and of course the next part of the parsha is the mitzvot of Yovel. That's every 49th year, right? Every 50th year, the land also is supposed to be fallow, is supposed to not be worked. So if you're counting every 7 years, 7 times 7 is 49. So the year after that 49th year is also supposed to be an extra year of no work. Everything goes back to, everybody gets their inheritance back, and it was a very, very interesting economic system. Rav Hirsch has a beautiful essay about it. Maybe we'll look at it next year. But basically, the entire economic stability of Israel was based on people keeping these mitzvot. Right? There was no chance that there would be anybody who's extremely rich and anybody who'd be extremely poor, and definitely no way for that person who was rich to hoard over, to control, to have like an oligarchy and control of the government of the poor. So that's one thing. Obviously, related to that is there's a mitzvah to help people who are poor, somebody who's come into hard times and had to sell their land. You're supposed to help them get their land back. You're supposed to pay for it based on how many years the land, right? There's a whole, because the land goes back and forth, and so everybody who buys the land knows he's not buying it permanently, right? It's not like it's kind of like more of a rental, an Airbnb more than anything else. You can't buy land permanently because in 49 years or less, depending on when the Yovel year, it will revert back to its owner. So that had to be factored into the price. Nobody would be allowed to cheat somebody else. We talked about the parsha talks about the Jew who's sold into slavery. Of course, that would only happen in very, very rare circumstances where somebody stole and was unable to pay back what the value of the thing they stole. Then they would be allowed to sell themselves into slavery. Otherwise, there's no such thing. They would have to work. And one of the reasons why it's so discouraged, why it's so difficult to sell yourself as a slave, because Hashem does not want us to be slaves to people. Hashem wants us to be servants to Him alone. And of course, there are many, many more mitzvot, but it's, like I said, a short parsha, 57 psukim in all, which is almost half of the average size parsha. So, but there's a lot to say, and so God willing, we'll get right into that with the deep dive. So that was a quick summary. Let's get into the psukim themselves. We're going to start with almost all of Parsha Behar is in chapter 25, maybe all of it. I'm not really that good with chapters, and that's not really a Jewishy thing. So let's see, 25.
I was gonna say you like reading, no? The chapters are in books, but meant in Aliyah.
Oh, yeah. The first two verses of chapter 26 are also in Behar. Okay. Anyways,
sorry, question, but like, why don't the Jewish people go by Aliyahs? Why do we go by chapters?
Who says who do you mean when you say Jewish people?
Like I'm saying,
there are books,
right,
or Gedaliahu and such that do not reference psukim, do not reference chapter and verse. You want to find a pasuk, they reference it to the Aliyah, the sixth pasuk in the fourth Aliyah. You can do that. It's just it's because there's already a standard. It's just so much easier for people to use that for reference.
Right. Okay.
So it doesn't have any holy or unholy significance. It's just numbers that help us find the place. Yeah. Okay, so let's do that. The very first verse. Hashem spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai, saying, So that's why this parsha, by the way, is called Behar, because it says Behar Sinai, which is a strange thing. And a lot of rabbis, a lot of commentaries tackle this issue. And we spoke about this a little bit in last year, even. But let's look at the classic Rashi, right? Rashi, who we don't quote enough in this class. We try to bring different opinions from all over the place, Hasidic opinions, Sephardic opinions, etc. Try to give you a big, we try to run the gamut. Try to give you as many different opinions as we can. So we don't always focus in on. You're welcome. We don't always focus in on the classic answer to the questions. We mention Rashi, of course, on almost every class. I think in my memory, there's one class when we had a whole class where we didn't mention Rashi, and I realized it at the end of the class, and I said, "Oh, we haven't said anything from Rashi." But otherwise, almost always, it's worth seeing what Rashi says if you have any questions in the Torah. So Rashi says on this Behar Sinai, he says, and then we know the next verses, as we're going to see in detail, talk about the Mitzvah of Shemitah. So Rashi asks, "Ma inyan Shemitah etzel Har Sinai?" What does Shemitah have to do with Har Sinai? It didn't say Har Sinai with the other mitzvot that we had. We didn't say Har Sinai by Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. It didn't say Har Sinai about the sacrifices that were made for the holidays in last week's parsha. It didn't say Har Sinai in regard to any mitzvah. We've had hundreds of them already. So why here by Shemitah it has to say Hashem told Moshe at Har Sinai? Didn't all the mitzvot come from Sinai? That's why one of the basic tenets of Judaism, the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, right? Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. The entire Torah, the oral law, and all of it, the details of every mitzvah, everything was given to him at Har Sinai, including Shemitah, including Yovel, including we want to go backwards, the mitzvot of last week's parsha, etc. So what's specific about Shemitah that Har Sinai had to be mentioned here? Torah doesn't mix words, right? There has to be a reason. Ela ma Shemitah namru chilaloteha ufratoteha v'diktukeha misinai avkula namru chilalotehen v'diktukehem b'sinai kach shinui b'Torah Kohanim. So Torah Kohanim, the Midrash that Rashi quotes, tells us that just like Shemitah is given at Har Sinai with all of its details and all of its laws and all of every single point and every prat and klal, every single general and specific thing, just like Shemitah is that way, so too all of the mitzvot were given at Har Sinai. There's not a single thing that Moshe made up on his own. And even the things that, well, we're not going to get into it now, but there's things that Moshe forgot, right? Like the mitzvah of about daughters inheriting, and the mitzvah of what Aaron was supposed to do about with the Rosh Chodesh Korban after his sons died. All of these things Moshe seemed to have forgotten, but he learned them once, and he had them at Har Sinai. Okay. And by the way, Shemitah has a lot of details. How do I know? Because as I mentioned before, we're learning in Mishnah Yomi, we're learning Shvi'it. And there are a lot of Mishnah. We're only halfway through. We're only like the fourth parak right now. And already there's just so much detail about when to pick fruit, what you can do about a wall that's in the middle of your property. What about what do you do if what do you do about plants that need help growing, and a lot of details. And all of those details were not made up in the Mishnah. Yeah, there are different opinions. The whole concept of oral law is complex, but all of those different opinions were all taught to Moshe at Har Sinai. That's one of the important details. Everything was taught at Har Sinai. That's what it says in Torah Kohanim Nirali Shekach Perusha. So this is now he's going to explain what it says there in Torah Kohanim. That was the midrash. Lefi Shalom Atzinu Shemitat Karkaot Shenishnet Be'arvot Moav B'Mishnah Torah. So just like we did not find in Mishnah Torah in Devarim this law concerning the letting the land rest. Lamadnu sheklototeha pratoteha kula namru misinai. You see, all the details must have been given at Sinai. There's no details in Mishnah Torah in Devarim, so it must be the details are somewhere. Every single word that Moshe would later say, they were all taught to him at Har Sinai. And then he went and repeated them all back at again at the fields of Moab, and it was right before they entered the land. All right, so that's Rashi. Basically, his answer is we need to have this mentioned here because there are a lot of details to this law, and this law is not going to be repeated again in Devarim, when Moshe repeats a lot of the mitzvot. So you might think that there are no details given at on Har Sinai, and that all the other details might have been learned somewhere else. Maybe the rabbis came up with them, whatever. So says the Torah, no, that's not the case. That's why we have to mention that they were given at Har Sinai, where all of the details were also given. These details were given as well. That's Rashi. Comes along the Khatam Sofer, 150 years ago or so, says the Khatam Sofer, a little knitch, a little difference here. Yeah. Yeah. So, Inyan Shemitah Eitzel Har Sinai. So he quotes Pirush Rashi, Ramban. He says the Shemitah Mavor Nigla Ine Kol Shehu L'chol Duktikei Sofrim Shabak Gon Isser Sfichim Hakol Mis Sinai. He says every single thing, every single detail, every single law that even rabbis come up with later, everything comes from Har Sinai. Everything is from Har Sinai. So that being the case, if everything is from Har Sinai, so the next question you need to ask yourself is Nikar Me'erev Shvit Tziva Birchato. So there's a mitzvah from before Shvi to say a special bracha l'shalosh hashanim to the sorry. There was a tziyua birchato. A great miracle happened. That there was a big bracha right before Shvi, the year before Shvi, that blessed 3 years. In other words, think about it. The 6th year is the year before the Shemitah year. In the 6th year, you needed to grow enough grain and enough fruit and enough everything else in your land to feed you for that 6th year, through the 7th year, and into the 8th year, right? Because you weren't growing anything in the 7th year. So how are you going to eat in the 8th year? Rosh Hashanah comes around and you don't have any food to eat. Kamosha, yeah, b'man. This is just like what happened with the man. Shenatan ein shin lechem yomayim alza amaru ki Hashem natan lachem b'Shabbat al kain hu notin lachem b'yom hashishi lechem yomayim. So remember, before Shabbat in the desert, the Jewish people received a double portion of man. Why? So they wouldn't gather it and work on Shabbat. And to not work on Shabbat, they were given an extra portion on the 6th day, which is Friday. and the Friday portion fed them enough for Friday and Shabbat. Why? Why did Hashem do that? So everybody would see, Ru'u ki Hashem natan lachem. Hashem gave it to you. Same thing with Shemitah, says the Khatam Sofer. I'll say it out right now. Shemitah is an obvious proof of Hashem's existence. Ramban sort of says the same thing. Ramban says it's an obvious proof that the Torah was given by Hashem, because no human being would make a promise like that. All right. If you've seen my video on this week's parsha, Shimon Schwab says basically, Rav Shimon Schwab says basically the same idea. But what the Khatam Sofer says here is a little bit different. Everything in all of nature, everything Hashem created, everything is from Hashem. Everything. And it's clear because anybody who kept Shemitah was blessed. And there's an unbelievable amount of growth, rainfall, and everything else in the 6th year, enough that they could survive 3 years worth on a 1 year on a 1 year's produce. Right? That's a huge yield. It's an obvious miracle, and that proved to everybody that it was Hashem. Never mind that. How about the fact that no human being could promise that? Right? You're hearing this from Moshe, right? This is imagine you're the first generation of Jews. Right? You receive the Torah from Mount Sinai. Comes along Moshe, and Moshe says, "Hey Jews, I know you want to have an agrarian society when we come to Israel. We're all going to be farmers and all. I got my farmer hat and everything. So just so you know, just because we're farmers doesn't mean we get to farm whenever we want to. We're going to farm for 6 years, and then on the 7th year, we're going to be blessed, and we'll just eat whatever we have." What? No, I'm not going to give up my job once every 7 years and just expect money to just come into my bank account. That's not how that works. So, indeed, that's what Moshe promises the people, and the people accept that promise. And the only reason that they would ever accept anything like that is because they were sure that it came from Hashem. So that's what the Khatam Sofer writes here. All right. Next verse 2. Easy, right? 25:2. Diber el bnei. So just remember, Hashem spoke to Moshe at Har Sinai, and he said, "Diber el bnei Yisrael v'marta alehem ki tavo al haaretz asher ani noten lachem v'shavta haaretz Shabbat laHashem." Speak to the Jewish people. Say to them that when ki tavo el haaretz, when they go into the land, when they get into the land, asher ani noten lachem, that I'm giving them, it'll happen. I will give them the land. V'shavta haaretz Shabbat laHashem. Make sure that they let the land rest, a Shabbat for Hashem. So first of all, this is a beautiful thing to talk about because we're coming up to Shavuot, and we spoke a few years ago now about the idea that there's a whole argument between the sages and the Baitusim, a certain sect of Jews who wanted to interpret the Torah completely literally. So where it says in last week's parsha that you count Achrei HaShabbat, after the Shabbat is when you start counting the Omer, they would start counting the Omer from the Sunday after Pesach. Right? It's the day after Shabbat, Machrei HaShabbat, after Shabbat. So what does Shabbat mean? So over here, by the way, is a clear proof that Shabbat can't possibly always have to mean Saturday, because you can't give the land a Saturday. You're giving the land a year, Shana, and it's being called a Shabbat. So Shabbat doesn't always have to mean Saturday. Just pointing that out, apropos to nothing right now, just to the fact that the time of the year. So Rabbeinu Bachya, or Rabbeinu Bachaya, however you want to pronounce it, wants to ask a question. He asks, and it's a long piece here. I'm going to try to summarize it if I find the right place. I might have brought down the wrong place. Yeah. So Rabbeinu Bachya asks the question, why specifically on the 7th year? Why couldn't it be the 1st year, 3rd year, 4th year, whatever you want? Why specifically the 7th year? And the answer is because it's called a Shabbat. Right? Shabbat is on the 7th day. Shvit is the 7th, and we're supposed to rest. Right? As Shabbat indicates something. It indicates that Hashem created the world. He rested on the 7th day. But the fact that he made the world in 6 days is there's probably a reason for that, right? It's not just I had to fit everything in, and just time ran out, so it took me 6 days. No, that's not how Hashem works. Every single thing was created on a specific day. And the number 6 and number 7 are significant. 7 represents the wholeness of something natural, right? Something natural and whole is 7. Something more than that, 8, that's already either unnatural or supernatural. The Gemara in Eruvin 40b quotes that 7 pops up a lot of times in the Torah. Paro's dream about the 7 cows. Yoshua going around Yericho 7 times. A lot of the korbanot that a Kohanim bring, he has to dip his finger in it 7 times. The Chatan and Kala nowadays, there's a halacha of Sheva brachot. There's Shiva for somebody who's in mourning, sitting for 6-7 days, right? Shabbat, as we said, the 6th day of the week. So because Hashem created Shabbat, and he created the entire world, all of the laws of nature, all of the laws of the world are all Hashem's. And we, who are the end of creation, really, before Shabbat was man and women was created. So we have this higher level of creation. We are obviously above animals and above other creatures, and we have the ability to restore the world to that original rest that the world once had. Right? Yom Shekulo Shabbat, the day that is completely Shabbat. Now there's going to be a time, it's going to be an era after Mashiach comes, God willing, soon, when we'll bring a time when the entire world is at rest, whatever that means. Okay, so good. So that's Rabbeinu Bachaya on this pasuk. Next pasuk, 25:3. See how fast we're going? 25:3. It says, Sheish shanim tizra sadecha. For 6 years you can sow your fields, you can plant there. Sheish shanim tizmor, and for 6 years you can prune karmecha, your vineyards. Ve'asafta es tevuata, and you can also gather in your yield, and you should. For 6 years, you can and should do all this work. Interestingly enough, if you look at the first 3 words, there's Sheish Shanim Tizra. You look at the last letters, you have a Shin, a Mem, and an Ayin. And that spells out the word Sofetevot Shema, says the Nachal Kedumim, which is the Chidah, right? The Holy Chidah writes Shema, the pasuk Shema Yisrael, Shisha Tevot Lomar Lecha Kol Hazorea Shisha Yamim, the Noach B'Yom HaShvi made Yechido Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there's other references in the Shema to this mitzvah of Shemitah. What's the connection between Shemitah and the Shema? So remember, we said Hashem created the entire world. What is the Shema? It's testimony to the fact that Hashem is one. Hashem created the world. Hashem is completely unique and separated from the world. He's not at all affected by anything that we do here. He's not like Lahavdil Elif Avdalot, the Greek gods who get angry and jealous and upset if something happens on earth that they don't like or that they wanted to do or whatever, right? So that's not our belief system. Hashem is not jealous. Hashem created the world, created all of the natural orders of everything that happens, and therefore, the very first words here, Sheish Shanim Tizra, are a reference to the Shema, where we testify to that fact. That the whole world and everything in it belongs to him, and he's in control. And that's how we continue with the Shema. We say Hashem gives us blessing when we behave, and takes away the blessing when we don't, etc. Next pasuk, next verse, 25:4. Look at us go. We're halfway through the class and already on the fourth verse. Ubashana Hashvit, and in the seventh year, Shabbat Shabbatuni Alaretz. It's going to be a Sabbath for the land. Shabbat la Hashem, Sadecha v'lo tizra v'charmacha lo tizmor. You're not allowed to at that point sow your land or prune your vineyards. It writes to Kli Yakar. Hold on 1 second. What did I say? Sheishanim Tizra. Okay. Let's see. The Kli Yakar actually says it on the previous pasuk. Okay. That's probably why I'm confused. So he writes that the Shemitah year has an ability to create peace. Let's see how he explains that. Kvar amarnu shizu haftacha shelo yachish chila afim yizra sheishanim refutzim v'lo yase shana bor achar shnei shanim zera. V'altzad sachar amar ki tavo el haaretz asher ani noten lachem ki be'emet ani noten lecha haaretz v'lo b'chilcha yireshet haaretz. Vish lachush. Okay, so hold on. So Hashem wanted to make it very clear that the land belongs to him. Why? Vish lachush, because there's a concern shalo tata that you shouldn't err, lomar, and say shalcha haaretz. The land belongs to you. Al kain ani mitzavcha shabbatcha haaretz shabbat la Hashem. Everybody should know that the Shabbat belongs to Hashem. Lo l'shem tosfot koach haaretz kim l'shem Hashem l'galot kihu yitbarach ba'al hasada. So Hashem makes you successful and makes the land fertile. That's up to him. Right. So he continues and says that the poorest person, let's see where it says this. Yeah, here we go. When we start talking about kiyamuchachicha, when your brother suffers, in other words, when your brother or fellow Jew, in this case, is unable to pay for his land to get it back, they said that it's because he became poor because he tried to benefit from Shvit. Oni, and that's how he got to be poor. And then he quotes Chazal that in Tani about a similar incident. But what you want to understand is the whole point of Shemitah is to create an environment of peacefulness. The Jewish people should somehow be united and not lord over each other, as can sometimes be the case otherwise. No one has this land. It doesn't belong to anybody. No government, no individual, no party. Nobody owns this land. This land is Hashem's, and He gave it to us as an inheritance. Okay. Let's continue. Yeah. Now we're going to skip. We're going to skip from verse 4 all the way to verse 10. That's because verses 5, 6, 7, and 8, and 9 deal with the details of Shemitah, and we pretty much covered that already in the summary. Like I said, it's a short parsha, so the summary can cover details. That's pretty normal. Okay. So next verse says, again, it's chapter 25, verse 10, Vikidashtem et shenat chamishim, and then you're going to make the 50th year holy. Kidashtem, shenat chamishit shana, v'karatem diror ba'aretz l'chol yishveha, yovel hi, it's going to proclaim liberty or freedom throughout the land. Those are the famous words that are etched onto the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, where the Constitutional Congress met. Anyway, so you're going to proclaim liberty throughout the land. To all the inhabitants of the land. Yovel hi, it's a Yovel. Tia lechol v'shavtam ish el achuzato, and each person can go back to his inheritance. V'ish el mishpachto tashuvu, and each person goes back to their family. In other words, if they were sold into slavery, etc., they go back to everybody. Everything gets a major reset, and everybody goes back to their own land, and everybody gets back their own things, like that. Thank you very much. So that's what happens at the Shemitah year. Writes Rav Zalman Soroskin. Zalman Soroskin has a question. Yeah. 1 second. Yep. He asks a question. What did the phrase say? Who is free? Chol yoshvecha, all the inhabitants. But we're talking about what? We're talking about slaves who were sold into slavery are now going back to their homes. Kol yoshvecha, just say kol avadecha, all your servants. Proclaim liberty to all your servants. It says all your inhabitants. Proclaim freedom throughout the land. Why? Right, so Zalman Soroskin, based on an idea. He writes here, Lavadim lo nomar, doesn't say to the slaves, L'kol yishvecha, to all the people who dwelt there. How is that possible? Hello, Rova, the Rova shel yoshvei haaretz einam avadim, u'ma shayach behem dror al yidei yovel. So most of the people were not slaves that they have to go back in Yovel. So Yesh Lomar Al Pi Divrei Yirmiyahu. He's going to quote Jeremiah, chapter 34. Sha'al Yidei Zeh Shalo Shalchu Duror Ish et Avdo V'ish et Shivchato Kasher Tzivah Hashem Yikra Hashem Duror Kol Acherev El Hadavar Ve'al Harav Yitenatam Biyad Oivehem V'lachtu et Are Yehuda. Right. So because they didn't listen to the laws, the entire country suffered. Hare sheshmira dine kriyat doror lavadim goremet lidror b'chofash shel kol yoshvei haaretz. Hold on. Hold on a second. Yeah. So right. So he's quoting this verse in 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 Yirmiyahu. I think it's in the Haftorah actually. And so what you're seeing is that when we don't listen to the laws, we all suffer. In other words, the freedom that's promised to the slaves is a freedom that affects everybody. The kol haaretz. Shalo yiplu b'yidei oivehem, that they don't fall into their enemies' hands. Vayechi chaya chofesh al admas Yisrael. This is why we say in Yovel, "V'karatem deror ba'aretz l'chol yoshveha mamish." This is, it's liberty. You should know that this is a liberty for all the inhabitants, not just ben abadim, ben livnei chorim. But whether you're servants or whether you're free people, you are free. Which, by the way, means there's a famous idea in the Gemara in Kedushin that whoever acquires a slave is really acquiring for themselves a master, right? The idea being that slavery, the chain, I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the Frederick Douglass, I think, had a famous speech where he said something to the effect of the chains that the master holds are actually holding them. It's holding him, right? So the slavery has a lot of negatives. One is that it ties people down to a very, very difficult kind of service. I mean, from the master's perspective, right? I'm not shedding a tear now for people who own slaves, but I want you to understand that slavery, when it's done properly and with dignity, is not an easy thing to do. And here we have the fact that the entire land is affected by the people who own these slaves, so that there could be a sort of communal pressure to make sure that those people who have slaves actually release them to go back to their homes in the Yovel year. Because if they don't, Yirmiyahu 34 tells us, if they don't, bad things can happen. Their enemies can take over. The Jewish people suffer. All of the people suffer when this kind of thing happens. So let's go further. We're going to skip quite a bit now. A lot of what we're skipping are the details of the Yovel year, what you can and can't do. All the diktukecha pirotecha that we talked about earlier. It's not even in the oral law. It's still written law stuff. All right. And this, I think, according to my plan, might be the last thing I have for us today. So class might end a little early. I apologize if you had planned to stay up and learn longer, but this is what I have planned. All right. So chapter 25, verse 36. Al tikach mi'ito neshech v'tarbit v'yareta melokecha v'chayachicha imach. So this is the famous idea that a Jew should not collect interest from another Jew. We talked about a famous Ramban about why that's the case last year. Talked about how that creates this sort of harmony amongst the Jewish people. The Jewish people have this brotherhood. Just like you wouldn't force your brother to pay you if they're suffering. If you were suffering, you wouldn't force your sister to pay you money if you knew that she fell on hard times. So why would you do that to another Jewish person? That's how close the Jewish people are supposed to be, that you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't charge interest. You would just lend the money, and just in the hopes that they fix their situation. So writes a Ktav Sofer. Ktav Sofer, by the way, one of the sons of the Chatam Sofer, who we started this class off with today. Interestingly enough, one of my favorite Jewish history podcasts, Jewish History Soundbites, had a week or two ago had a short summary of the descendants of the Khatam Sofer. Barely much about the Khatam Sofer himself. Just talked about the history of his descendants, including the Khatam Sofer. Basically, took over for his father, the yeshiva that his father was running, and the town that he was the rav of. And so writes the Khatam Sofer. In a sense, the reason I brought that up is because what's interesting is, in a sense, the Ktav Sofer is, at least according to many people, is the intellectual heir of his father, right? He's the one who's going to carry on his father's Torah, his father's philosophy and worldview, and the way his father taught and understood the Torah. So he writes, in an explanation of why we don't charge interest. This is another explanation besides the one I just gave you from the Ramban. Al tikach mito neshech, etc., etc. So we're going to skip to where he gets into the commentary. Nearly the Farish. It seems to me, here's how you can explain it. I saw once in a book, Shekatav Tam She'asar Hakatuv Likach Neshech. Now, the reason that the Torah forbade interest, Kimasir betachono me'Hashem, to teach you, to focus you, to have faith in Hashem. Ki hazorea hu biyad Hashem, the person who's sowing seeds, the farmer, he understands that things have to come from Hashem. You can work all you want. You can work day and night. You can, not sleep and bargain with the seed company and the this and the that and plant this way and plant that way. Work this part of the land, work the other part of the land. Rotate your crops. Do whatever you want. But if it doesn't rain, you lost everything. If it doesn't rain, you lost everything. And are there times when it doesn't rain? There sure are. And Hashem promises us in the Shema that we mentioned earlier that he's going to give us matar bi'ito. He's going to give us the rains in their time. The good, healthy kind of rain that we need for crops to grow, that's going to come in its time. And if rain comes at the wrong time, like say in the summer, it's going to flood the land. It's going to ruin the crops. Can anything bad happen from that? Yeah, famine. People starve to death. Can that happen? Yes. So the farmer has to have faith in Hashem. There's a common idea mentioned by Rav Hirsch and by others. I saw it on a sign outside of a farm recently, not so recently, outside of a farm outside of Yuma. Farmers have to believe in God. They don't have a choice. It's clear to them that Hashem runs nature. The mischaro enu yodea im yarviach o yafsid ve'ene el Hashem. And even the somebody who's a businessman, a buyer seller, right? So he knows also that all these things come from Hashem, right? The value of something is going to go up or down. You don't know. You had a storage facility full of baby food, right? Baby formula. And then whatever's happening now with baby formula happens, and all of a sudden the price of your baby formula shoots up. The value, the supply and demand. Supply and demand is not in control, cannot be controlled by anybody. As much as the government and the media might want to control these things sometimes, supply and demand cannot be controlled by anybody. A lot of people want something, and there's a little bit of it. Guess what? The value of it will go up. That doesn't mean you have to scalp everybody for it. Doesn't mean that you take advantage at this point, but you can make a little more money. It doesn't have to be a lot more. It could be a little more. You make up the difference of some loss you had. So that person, that businessman, should also realize that there has to be some sort of, controlling element. We'll call it God. We'll call it Hashem. All right. Something is in control of these things that's making this person wealthier or unsuccessful based on his mazel or whatever you want to call it. Aval malve, but the money lender, somebody who lends money on interest, batuach libo shirveh. So he only trusts himself. His profit margin is determined by him, or so he thinks. It's not supply and demand anymore. You can charge whatever you want for your interest, and if somebody's desperate enough, doesn't matter what else is going on in the world, someone will do it. So that's why the Torah forbids this person from taking interest from a Jew. Because he's just getting richer and richer, and he can think that all of this is happening without any finger of Hashem involved at all. And that's wrong. So why doesn't it also forbid us from taking taking interest from a Gentile? I was once asked this question by a Gentile, uncomfortably, in a gas station. So yes, we are allowed to charge interest to Gentiles, which is how the Jews were able to survive medieval Europe, when that was the only job they were allowed to have, was being money lenders, and they lent money to the Gentiles on interest. And the Ramban at this point would say, because we're not supposed to have that kind of chiba, that kind of relationship of a love and affection that we have for the Jewish people, we're not supposed to have that same level of love for the Gentile world. That's what the Ramban would say. But the Khatam Sofer says, Ki benachri hu misupak imlo yafsid al yedei shelo yishalim lo. Okay, Devorah. So again, he's quoting this book that's saying that when it comes to a Gentile, there's a doubt. There's always a doubt. There's a suffix. What's the doubt? The doubt is whether he'll be able to repay the loan even immediately, and then not have to be charged interest. So the lender feels like he's still needs Hashem's kindness. He still needs to pray to Hashem to make sure that the Gentile has to pay him back so he can make that money. Because that's how he's making money. So there's still an element where you need Hashem. In other words, Shemitta and Yovel and interest, all of them boil down to the same thing. Bitachon. Understanding that Hashem runs the world and you need him. And according to the Khatam Sofer, the Ktav Sofer, his son, he says that the whole point of making charging interest illegal is to make sure that the Jew somehow still has to pray, still has to realize there's a touch of Hashem in his work. He's always involved. Otherwise, there's just no way to know if he'll ever make any money. If that's how he makes his money, by charging interest, so people might always pay on time. Where's the money come from? Banks are smart, right? Kind of like the casinos in Vegas. They're never the losers, right? Banks never lose out. So if a bank is sending you information about a credit card, et cetera, it's because they learned something about you that you might not know. And that's that you're going to spend money and you're going to forget to pay the bill and you're going to accumulate charges and you're eventually going to have money that you're going to owe them and it's going to raise interest, et cetera, and they're going to make money off of you. They're not sending you a fancy, nice little card because they like you. They're sending it because they want to make money off of you. And they have to depend on the fact that you won't pay something on time. And they can do that. You know why? Because the majority of people are living beyond their means. The majority of people owe money. And the majority of people pay credit card bills, credit card charges almost every month. And that's what makes the bank so rich. The person who's making money that way has to hope, has to pray that somebody's not going to pay on time. That's the only way they're going to make money. Otherwise, the whole business is for nothing. So that's basically, in a nutshell and with some detail, what the parsha is about. Again, bitachon, faith in Hashem. So that allows us to have the Shemitah year, where we let the land go fallow, the land of Israel specifically. I mentioned the story in Shul. I think it was Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur time. I mentioned how there was a lady who called right before Rosh Hashanah from, I think it was Julian, a non-Jewish lady, and she asked me how to keep Shemitah. If she doesn't water her crops, her animals are going to die. So I said to her, first of all, just so you know, the mitzvah, the Torah laws were given to the Jewish people. So only Jewish people have to keep it, but also they only have to keep Shemitah in Israel. There's no promise of a blessing outside of Israel. So yes, if you don't water your crops, your animals won't have anything to eat and they will die. In Israel, that's not the case. In Israel, you don't have to water your crops. The animals will take care of themselves. There's going to be an extra blessing, an extra yield. In the previous year, everybody will have what to eat and what they need to take care of themselves. All right. So that's the parsha. Thank you for listening. I want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, a happy after Lag BaOmer. Can't tell you what day of the Omer it is right now because I haven't counted yet. But everybody should have a wonderful evening, a wonderful Shabbat. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.